Are you a 3PL spending more time and money than you'd like recruiting and onboarding logistics roles? Then it's time to check out Rapido Solutions Group, the leaders in nearshore logistics staffing. Located right next door in Mexico, they have access to the freight talent you need. From carrier sales to tracking and tracing and everything in between, they can do the heavy lifting for you. So if you're ready to get your time back and want to move fast, check out Rapido Solutions Group. Visit gorapido.com to get started today. Have you heard about Bitfreighter and the EDI revolution? Bitfreighter helps companies automate communication with their freight partners through unlimited messaging and quoting. Traditional providers can't say that. The Bitfreighter team is also available 24/7 and responds immediately by phone, email, or yes, even text. Legacy providers can't say that either. So if you want to scale your operations to save time and money, come join the EDI revolution with us. Visit bitfreighter.com to get started today. Hello, and welcome to the Bootstrapper's Guide to Logistics, the podcast highlighting founders doing it the way that doesn't get a lot of attention. We're here to change that by sharing their stories and inspiring others to take the leap.
It's a roller coaster ride. You might ultimately fail.
That's when I kind of knew I was onto something.
It was very hard.
It truly is building a legacy.
The more life you live, the more wisdom you have.
Because we are where we're supposed to be, kind of answering the call.
Don't shoulder entrepreneurship on your own.
I'm your host, Nate Schutz. Let's build something together from the ground up. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. We're going to have an interesting conversation this week. If you were here last week, we talked with Paul from the Freight Caviar team and explored his journey on going from being in freight brokerage to writing and creating content around it, and the journey of what it takes to make it as an entrepreneur doing media in the supply chain world. This week, we're going to unpack the quirky and unpredictable journey of Reed Loustalot, who's the Chief Everything Officer at Lost Freight. We're going to try to figure out what exactly Reed does and what that means, because he's definitely got a following and a community that he's built. And we don't know where it's going to go. But Reed, good morning. I'm in Minnesota. You're in Arizona. We're fundamentally different climates, but we are both in this weird, crazy industry doing weird, crazy things ourselves. How are you?
I'm good, Nate. Thanks for having me. We are doing weird stuff, and that's a beautiful thing, I think. So happy to be here. Excited to talk a little bit about whatever. So let's do it.
Well, and thanks for being so patient. We have had more scheduling challenges getting this on the books than I think any other guest that I've had. So thanks for your patience and grace. Why don't we start with some of your education background, and then we can unpack what Lost Freight's all about. I noticed that you went to school for philosophy. And how did you end up in freight after doing that?
I needed a job.
Most philosophers do. It doesn't pay a lot.
Yeah, no, I did it, because I was interested in it, the idea of it at least, and I liked reading and I liked having, discussions with people, but I found the actual practice of academic philosophy to be rather dull, and the subject matters overwhelmingly to be pretty arcane and ivory tower and not very interesting to me. So I wouldn't say that I was the best philosophy student. I did it because at the end of the day, I wanted to graduate in 4 years, and I had the most credits towards that major. And so I was just like, screw it. I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to graduate. And obviously I needed a job. So got into freight because I needed a job, and a buddy of mine was working at Echo at the time. And that's what got me into freight.
Are there any things that you remember from studying philosophy that you maybe, you're clearly a highly intelligent individual. Did you accumulate certain things on that journey that you carry with you, or was no, that was just a diversion? And
I would say, very broadly speaking, I carried my desire to engage with people in conversation in very open settings, and just about anything, not necessarily about philosophy per se, but just dialogue and conversation and questioning stuff, and people having opinions, just having opinions about things and talking about them. So I very, broadly speaking, I think I carry that. I was generally, I think more interested in, the conversation, but doing it in actual, like legitimately getting people together in a group and talking about stuff was what I like to do and what I like to do in school. And as soon as I graduated, I like started to think about how I might do that in reality, like, or in the real world, so to speak, like for a job. And it's funny, like looking back, because I've almost kind of done it, not about philosophy, but like just about all this freight stuff. So it's weird. I don't know.
Well, the essence, or one of the areas of philosophy that I've always found interesting is like, how do you define the essence of something at its core? And maybe that's why I'm so fascinated to talk with you, because I don't know what you do.
Well, neither do I. So you're not alone in that, and most people don't. So I've as we were talking about before we started recording, I have kind of leaned into the mystery a little bit. I don't really like to think too. It's ironic because while I am interested in philosophy, and I guess in philosophy you do think a lot, quote unquote, but I don't like to think too. Like, I don't like to try to pick apart everything that I'm doing. I
Yeah.
don't want to think about it too much. I kind of more like to operate on, okay, this is like feels good or it's fun. This is interesting at the moment. Like, I'm just going to run with that for a second. So
Yeah.
it's just the end result is just like doing a bunch of things at once. And I think that does lead to confusion, but I've learned to use that, I think, as an asset. So.
Well, one area that you clearly have a firm grasp on is freight brokerage culture. From your background at Echo, and then you spent time at Armstrong, how would you describe freight brokerage to somebody who's never been exposed to the industry?
So, freight brokerage, by and large, I think, is filled with a lot of people who have similar stories to me. Like, they got out of school and they needed a job. And so there's a lot of people who are in it, not because they've always wanted to do it, but because they needed something to do. And there's a lot of people who are really good at it, who've been in it for a while, that kind of, you would think, oh, you're really good at this. You're really good at freight sales or whatever. Like, you're a good carrier rep. And, oh, it turns out that they were, in culinary school or some random thing like that. And so I think that freight brokerage is it's a very stressful world, and it's not for everybody as a result. And I've got some opinions about why that is, but it's very, I would also say it fits my kind of humor slash like sarcasm slash kind of just like irreverent type humor too.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's very applicable in this domain because there's so many absurd things happening, and it is so stressful, and it tends to attract, a certain type of person who has to be a little rough around the edges. So, not has to be, but tends to be.
Tends to be, sure.
So yeah, freight brokerage is, it's not for everybody, but it's a super interesting little subsection of our economy that very few people think about or know exists, but is responsible for kind of the routing of a good portion of the nation's kind of supply chain. So I think it's a cool little niche.
And
Not even little.
you've definitely tapped into the zeitgeist of what it's all about. When we were at FreightWave's Future of Freight in Chattanooga last November, I think that was the last software demo of the conference, was Freight Gong as a Service, or Gong as a Service. And I recall thinking to myself, that is absolutely brilliant and ridiculous simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah, that was funny. When they asked me if I wanted to do that, I was like, at first I was like, well, maybe I should actually be trying to demo my real business. But then I was like, actually, like, maybe I can just talk about it in my speech as a joke, but people will take it seriously because all I do is joke around, and it's like a good way to deliver a message that I'm serious about. So,
well, and the way that you committed to it is what made it work. If you had gone up
yeah,
there being goofy, it probably wouldn't have landed.
yeah,
But to go up there, I mean, we've all seen hundreds of software demos. They're awkward.
Yeah.
the system doesn't quite work as well because it's VPN'd into their system and they're trying to do
Yeah.
it through Wi-Fi, and it's always a little bit clunky. But you just committed. You went for it as though you were selling this service, and I mean, it captured a lot of attention.
It's funny. I wrote that speech in the car. Me and the Freight Caviar guys and my buddy Rob drove from Chicago to Chattanooga like the day before the conference, and I wrote it in the car, that speech, in probably 30 minutes. And I did, like, Rob, my buddy Rob, who I was driving with, he was like, I've got all these ideas. You should do this. I'm like, no, I'm just going to write this, and I'm going to read it to you like twice, and that's going to be it, and I'm going to be done with it. And that was it. I mean, I literally wrote it and didn't really make too many changes, and just kind of went up there and read it. So
Well,
you got to lean in. You got to lean into it.
in the place that we are in, both business cycles and just fatigue of being sold to all the time,
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing is capturing attention, and it's people are laughing, and there's a lightheartedness to it. But then behind all of that, there's actually business happening. So what was the original idea for What Lost Freight as a technology platform or as a service? What was the vision when you bought the domain?
So it's funny. I mentioned my buddy Rob, who's a director of sales is at an Armstrong agency called Maca Logistics, and I spent a brief stint there. Anyway, I was with him in Chicago in his office, and he needed like this very kind of rudimentary tracking, like LTL shipment tracking portal, like nothing like actually tied into anything real time, like literally just, this is the day something's going to deliver. Like, I'm going to send you a USPS tracking link. Like, you put the number in, it shows you when it's delivering, and that's really it. Right. And so he needed something like that. And I had taught myself how to code. And he knew that we're friends. And so he was like, hey, you think you can build something like this? And I was like, probably. Yeah. Yes. I said yes. But in the back of my mind, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I'll figure it out though. And so I started building that. That was June of 2022. I basically demoed him the thing I had built, and they were like, yeah, let's do it. And so I started the business, called it Lost Freight, because my last name is often pronounced Lost a lot. And I had made all these like stupid projects, like kind of coding projects. And I always use the word lost in the name of it. And so I just called it Lost Freight because that's what I called everything else that I did. And at the time, I wasn't really like, I didn't really think I would ever do anything with it besides do this, and then or do that specific project with my buddy Rob. And then I called it FR8 because the domain was way cheaper to spell it that way.
Sure.
So it was like a $12
on GoDaddy,
yeah,
probably.
Yeah, it was something like that. And spelling it out normally, like Lost Freight, was like $1,000 or something like that. So I was like, nah, it's all right. I'll just spell it FR8. And so I did that. And then that was the initial like product idea, was this kind of tracking thing. And very quickly realized that I didn't know what I was doing when it came to like writing code and building. And I almost cursed there, but I didn't. Building stuff that
Good job. Way to go, Reed.
Building stuff that people actually use is like a whole different game than building stuff that just you use. You know what I mean? Like, you're much more accepting of bugs as the person who's building something than a customer is. So I knew very quickly that I was a bit over my skis and out of my element and anyway, I had met this dude on Twitter, Jake, who's now my business partner in Lost Freight. I had met him like 10 months prior talking about golf and crypto, and found out quickly that he was a software engineer. And so he would help me. He, over the past 10 months, had helped me frequently just with projects that I was working on. He would come in and be like, hey, this code is like all wrong. Like, let me fix it for you. Like, and I'll show you why. So I hit him up and I was like, hey, I'm building this thing, and it's super buggy. I think I was about to do like a demo to Rob, and I was like, okay, nothing's working. I'd spent like, days and days trying to fix all these systems, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so he came in and helped me and was kind of just like, well, what are you working on? And I was like, I did this track thing, but I don't think this is really what I actually want to do with this. And so I had this new idea, or not new, but I had this idea that was like centered around capacity, kind of drawing on my experience as a carrier rep for all those years at Echo. And I was like, Jake, you want to do this with me? And you can do the coding and I'll just do everything else. And he was like, yeah, sure. So that was, I think, October or September, end of September 2022. And yeah, kind of the rest is history.
And so what exactly is it now? So you're creating somewhat of a marketplace for capacity?
So it is not a two-sided marketplace yet. Like there's no load board aspect to it. Brokers, there's nothing for brokers to do other than passively consume carrier capacity.
Okay.
Basically, the thought process was, I kind of look back at my experience as a carrier rep and I was like, well, most of my day was spent calling carriers, the guys I worked with every single day, my carriers, many of whom I'm still friends with, many of whom are customers now. I was just calling them and asking where their trucks were. Hey, what do you have today? What do you have tomorrow? Like, I call a new carrier. I'd ask them what lanes they ran. I'd ask them what kind of equipment they have. Like all these kind of like carrier prospecting calls and activities. I was like, it was always better for me when I would call a carrier and I would say, hey, where are your trucks? And they'd be like, hey, you know what? Why don't I add your email to my truck list and I'll send it to you every morning?
Mm-hmm.
Or here's this Google sheet you can pull up and it'll have our truck list. And I was like, that was all. I was like, why doesn't every carrier do that? That's so stupid that they don't. It's so much. Like at the end of the day, if you're a carrier, you should be making it easy as possible for all the people you work with to know where you have capacity, to know where you have trucks. And you don't need to use all these like crazy systems to do it, right? Just a list, like, or in an email. And so we basically just built a tool for a carrier to kind of house all this information, capacity, the lanes they run, what kind of equipment they have, how to get in touch with them, all these things on like a nice page, like a profile, and they can just send the link to whoever they want and say, hey, instead of calling me, just use this. And then we built a little email list tool. They could build a little email list and press a couple buttons and blast, as many truck lists as they wanted out. And then we added a new thing called not new now, but this thing called the preferred broker list, which is literally you're a broker, you land on your page, you're like, hey, like I would love to just get truck list emails from people who use LOSTFR8, and you can just put your email in like you would subscribe to a newsletter, and you'll just get them. Carriers can check a box and press send, and it'll hit that whole list too. So we're kind of introducing new brokers to our customers as well. So
you're getting a combination of semi real time information for others to be able to make decisions off of, and then a system of record or a repository where you can automate a bunch of and remove phone calls from maybe what's still the most phone dependent industry in the world.
You can I guess how I would characterize it is like normally you'd be calling somebody asking them a question where their trucks are, but now you're going to the next step, which is okay, where their trucks are. Now you can have some idea of what to offer them. So the odds of you wasting each other's times is like slightly less. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so much of the tech that's built, I think, just kind of falls flat because it's so obsessed with like going really far right off the bat. I'm just like, like, let's just make one step here. Like, let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's say, let's go from knowing nothing to knowing a little bit, and the relevant offer percentage just goes slightly more up, So that anyway, yeah.
I mean, that's a very iterative approach, and it's very pragmatic. You're right. We see a lot of tech in the industry that's trying to boil the ocean, or capture the entire industry, and occasionally it works, but it takes a lot of funding and it takes a lot of time to realize that. Whereas the folks that are doing something organically, very pragmatic and unsophisticated in a way that you can throw it away when it doesn't work and iterate a couple of steps better the next time around, is it feels more sustainable because the risks are so much lower.
Yeah, it's obviously the risks or the stakes might be a little lower when you haven't gone and raised a bunch of money, when you haven't got a bunch of cooks in the kitchen, like with betting on this to kind of, you're not a horse in the race essentially.
Yeah.
So Yeah, and I'm much more interested. Like, I like to do a bunch of other stuff too, obviously, and I have other activities going on. So, and that's all happened. That's actually all really kind of happened organically and grown out of my attempts to market this initial service. We launched about a year ago this time, and it was very humbling because I looked back and I was like, man, like this should be a slam dunk. Like, we've got this great product that I know will work because I was on the other end and I would have loved to have a carrier be using this. You know what I mean? Like, this should be obvious. But what I quickly realized is, like, what's clear to me and what makes sense to me is very hard to put into words in
Mm.
a succinct, easy to consume format, to where a decision, not even just a carrier, but like a decision maker at a carrier, like a fleet owner or like a
Huh?
dispatcher or somebody like that, is just going to be like, oh, that's obvious. Like, I should be doing this, yada. But the reality is that most carriers I know don't do stuff like this, and it's not obvious to them always. And so
Uh-huh.
I've had this whole sort of like, it's been very humbling to realize, oh man, like, just because you built something that's is useful and it's not obvious to other people, and they might even disagree with you on the outset, So it's been very interesting.
Well, we're shifting then from the actual operation side of it or the solution side into influencing people and marketing. And I
Yeah,
have to ask, who does your marketing collateral for you? I can see your
me. It's
banner
just
in the
me.
background and
It's just
this. I
it's
can't
just
tell
me.
what font is that. What font is on your hat? How would we describe? No, the one that you're wearing.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
No, dude, I've done everything myself. I've not done nobody. Has done all the coding, so I owe the actual like product to him.
And you have
But I've
graphic design
no
you, with
like
a
myself
Sharpie.
personally.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, your Sharpie and a notepad.
Yeah, so the hat was yeah, I did this obviously myself. I've had people ask me if this is designer. Uh but I always say no, it's not designer, but it is bespoke. That's what I say.
Well, I mean, there's a distinct vibe to it.
Yeah.
I could see that selling for $1,100 on
Yeah.
Fifth Avenue in New York.
I know, it is funny. I walked into this is a point aside, but I walked into this kind of like streetwear store a couple weeks ago, and I was wearing this, and a dude was like, "Oh, what's that?" Like, I was like, "Perfect, perfect."
It's like an indictment on the entire fashion industry, perhaps.
It's awesome, man. I love it. I love. I'm very interested in brands in general. Like, I have no formal training in any of this. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, obviously, I was a philosophy major. I never took a marketing class. I even had kind of a disdain for marketing because I just like it's funny because my dad is kind of an entrepreneur too, and he would always tell me like you should be understanding marketing, all this stuff, and it was like, I hate marketing, that's stupid, like I'm not going to do that. And it's funny because basically like all I do now is try to market stuff. So
so let's talk about that because unintentional or whatever it may, without a plan, it might be, you have attracted a following. And I mean, I would argue that as much as what you're building for software, and now you sell hats, and that actually makes money, and you sell out all the time on that. That the real potential, larger opportunity is how do you capitalize on this audience and this community that you've built? Because
hmm
you are a community builder.
hmm yeah, no, I that's a good question. And it's something that I have started to only think about really recently
Mm,
because I did not, from the outset, have in my head that I would be like, this was not a plan,
yeah.
right? Like, I think I do nowadays. I'm very active on Twitter, and there's a lot of people on Twitter kind of talking about community based businesses. And I have only started to consume that sort of content and really started to consider what these people are saying recently. I did
Mm,
not. I started I started the Discord just because Jake and I were using it to collaborate and work. And initially, I was like, maybe we'll invite some of our customers. Maybe we'll use it as a feedback channel, something like that. And I basically just started tweeting, and over time started inviting people to it. And it's, yeah, I mean, it's I've got like almost 1,200 people in there now. So it's that's all in the last year. And we started doing events probably this summer. We started doing events every week, and those are ongoing. And I've got a little kind of like live show I do in there recorded. We kind of put those recordings out too. So I've had some really good, interesting conversations that are like 3 hours long with like a live component to it. Cause there's like an audience, it's like a stage in the Discord. And we usually can get, 40 to 50 people showing up to these things. So, I mean, it's totally taken on a life of its own, like, but it was not planned by any means. But I did, I think maybe in April, when I started, we probably had 100 people in there in April. And I was like, I feel like this could be just like its own thing. Like, this is very, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, I think. But even then, like, I told my wife and she was like, what are you talking about? Like, that's so, and people probably still think that, but anyway, no,
Well, let's go a little bit further. Maybe we can riff on this community-based business thing for a bit, because I've been studying it myself for a couple of years now, actually. And one of the examples is we had a guest on the show in the very first season, very early on, where there was a Facebook group around horse owners and farmers. And one of the challenges that they ran into was if they sold an animal, they needed to ship it.
Yeah.
And shipping live animals is very, very difficult, especially if it's cross country, specialized equipment, and there's no national carrier that does that kind of work. And they have 20 to 25,000 members in that Facebook community. And so he saw that as an opportunity and effectively created a load board for shipping live animals. So step one was find the common interests. Step two was find the common pain. And then step three was build a solution to solve for that pain. And you have a built-in customer base. And the company is called Hauling Buddies. You should go check it out. Anybody who's listening, because they're still. He also taught himself how to code Ruby on Rails, learning one step at a time. And so that type of, if you attract people to a location, let's just say that you are you have a music community, you attract people to want to go to live events. Well, let's say you host that in a field, eventually they're all going to be hungry and they're all going to be thirsty.
Yeah.
So you can service that community with a food truck and a beer truck. And that's how the community gets monetized. And those are just a couple of very simple examples. But as I say that to you, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny that I've almost done this not in reverse, but some might look at it like, I think a lot of these kind of more people who think about community-based businesses might be like, oh yeah, you've done it reverse. But I built a product first, then I built a community, and the way we have carriers, like we have drivers in the community, we have fleet owners, but like the vast majority of the people in there are brokers, tech people, freight forwarders, like basically everybody except the customer of our product, which is funny in hindsight because that's just kind of worked out that way. But so I think that there is some obvious things that I can do, that the products that I could kind of turn around and offer to that would augment the community, so to speak. I think there's, a job board. I think there's a directory play here. I think that all the things that, and I think that there's even a load board too. Like we have a channel in the Discord where people are typing out their loads every single day. Yeah. And I think that there's also connections to be made to Lost Freight too, right? Like we could dump capacity, like carriers sending truck lists could dump it into the Discord too, and that would be visible to all the people in there who are looking to book freight, right? And then I've also thought, like, maybe I just package up all the opportunities in the Discord, like cumulatively go out to the people, the brokers in there, and say, hey, you've got all these lanes you're putting into this channel here. Why don't I just package that up in an email and send it to the Lost Freight carrier base, right? Maybe that feeds into that. So there's all these. It's so interesting to think about, like, starting with the community, what are all the things that they're all trying to do with each other within it? And then how can you use tools that you can build to basically wire up the group? And all of a sudden you're no longer thinking about how do I acquire all these random customers that I know nothing about, like in the
Exactly.
traditional sense. But you kind of have people who have clearly signaled they're bought into the brand, they're bought into the vibe, and they're there, and it's a friendly environment. And you can just equip them with tools that don't need to be the biggest thing in the world, but work for the group. And that's really it. Like, you make your own market essentially, and you can kind of just like, it doesn't matter if load boards exist. Like, this is a load board for the group, right? It doesn't matter that Indeed exists. This is a job board for the group where everybody is kind of like bought into the circle of trust, essentially.
Oh, they're
So
vetted, they're trusted.
yeah,
They share some set of values, and that is the definition of a community-based business. So many
yeah,
companies right now are trying to generate communities because
yeah,
they're having to spend so much on marketing and advertising
yeah,
to try to
yeah,
drive interest, and it feels like the rules of the game have changed in the
yeah,
last 5 years ish, maybe. The rise of social media has given access. 20 years ago, you couldn't have done any of this because you wouldn't have been able to buy a TV station or something like
yeah,
that. But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
free internet, free social media accounts, you can reach tens of thousands of people
yeah.
instantly.
It is pretty magical. But I think we're very, very, very early
Uh huh.
in this sort of domain, despite it being a thing for years and years now. And I've only discovered, like I said, I've only discovered it recently. So I think that it's also just one of the things that made freight tolerable to me when I was more, in my role as a broker, was working with the same people over and over again, working with people that I developed relationships with, like people I was friends with essentially. And we all love to throw around the word relationship. Like, it's such like a buzzword in, especially broke. Oh yeah, we customer relationships, carrier relationships. Yeah, of course, duh. We love that word, but like, it's real. Like, it's so much more enjoyable and just better from a business standpoint in many situations to work with people that you're kind of in line with, that you do know, that are bought into a brand, that are part of the community, right? Like, and so many of these companies, when they try to be the biggest thing in the world, like, they try to be the bee's knees, they try to be please everybody. You just kind of, it's that does not jive with the community thing at all. Like, you can't be the biggest thing in the world and have that sort of thing. So I think I'm much more interested in not building the biggest thing in the world. I'm much
Yep.
more interested in, like, how do we just make it really good for the group, and just figure out how to grow the group without ruining it.
I mean, you're saying so many things that I can relate to. We've built a community of entrepreneurs in supply chain following a similar, not method, but a similar philosophy, to be honest, of if you have trust in camaraderie, chemistry, and shared values around whatever it might be, it's sticky. People want to come back and
Totally.
connect with those. And so we do have dozens and dozens of supply chain entrepreneurs that get together every month and help each other. And trying to grow it fast is the enemy, because
Totally.
you don't know what it can become, and you can have an idea, somewhat of a blueprint that guides what you're not going to be, but
Hmm.
what it will actually become has to emerge organically, listening to and talking to members and seeing where they want it to go, as opposed to this really aggressive growth at all costs, because you will kill what makes it special as soon as sell out, to be honest.
Well, it could be frustrating to the people who, because we always talk about roadmaps in these
Yeah, we
businesses, and
do.
people are just like, oh, the roadmap, like the roadmap. I'm like, dude, I don't have a roadmap at
Yep.
all. I've none, and I used to beat myself up about that. I used to think like, oh, we need, like, what do we need to be doing, in 6 months or in a year or in 10 years or whatever. And you listen to a lot of kind of entrepreneur type focus, like building businesses, startups, whatever, right? You listen to a lot of this content and they're like, what's your 10-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? And I'm just like, dude,
I don't have a
none of that.
plan.
None of that. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. Actually, no, I'm going to Steely Dan tomorrow. I'm going to Steely Dan show and I'm stoked. So that's what I'm doing tomorrow. But Sunday, I have no idea what I'm doing.
It
I don't know what I'm
reminds
doing
me of
next
the
week.
line from the Dark Knight where the Joker says, "Do I look like a guy with a plan?"
Yeah. No, I very much identify with that. And I used to, and that's always been how I've like thought. And I, like I said, I have, as if I look back and reflect, I have self-flagellated for that. Like I've beaten myself up mentally. Like, why don't you have a plan? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's your plan? It's like I almost cursed there. Screw plans. It's
That's
like,
two times, Reed. You have exhibited such personal growth and restraint today. I'm really impressed.
well, it's funny because I was on Paul's podcast. I was on Freight Caviar. We recorded it in September, and he just posted it maybe like a couple weeks ago, and he released a bunch of clips. And every single clip was me just like cursing like a sailor. And I was so offended by myself when I listened to it. I was like, I sound like an idiot. I cannot do this anymore. So I do appreciate. I like going on shows where I can't curse because it forces me to not sound like an idiot, basically.
Well, we can all help each other grow, and if that's the small way that I've perhaps helped you in the lost freight journey today, I'm
Yeah.
glad to have done it.
Yeah.
Want to give a quick shout out to what you're doing with your Discord and when you're hosting on Twitter Spaces. There's a handful of other folks that are doing some really cool stuff like that too. Chad Carlton comes to mind. Chad has a 3PL group for small e-com fulfillment operators that has a Slack channel, and they help each other every single day. That chat is going 24 hours a day with, hey, where do I find cheaper supplies for this, or how do I solve this issue in my WMS? And he takes all of the membership fees basically and donates it to charity to help fight sex trafficking, which is just incredibly inspiring and noble. And so shout out to Chad. There's a really cool community around a very small niche of just e-com fulfillment independent operators, 2 to 100 employees, for example. And there's more like that popping up all the time. You have one, obviously I've got one with Ballast, our founder community, and they just keep popping up. And it is a new wave. I would say, this is my bold prediction for 2024 maybe, is that community based businesses are the new SaaS.
Yeah. I don't, I definitely think that they're going to catch on. I think that I will be interesting. It would be interesting to see how more people do this in our domain, specifically in freight. I think that freight is just such a gigantic industry. And so I hope to God that there are more people considering how to do this. And instead of like trying to capture the entire market like we tend to, just going and being like, okay, like how do I get the small, like who said this? So like I said, I don't really have any formal marketing training, but I have read one book by um, Seth Godin, and if you've not listened to Seth Godin or read any of his books, he's an interesting guy, but he's kind of a marketer. I think you'd probably attach that label to himself. He had this idea of the smallest viable audience, basically, and instead of like minimum viable products, like smallest viable audience, like what is the smallest group of people you can build something for? And I kind of read that maybe a year ago, and I was like, oh, that's like interesting. But I think that a lot of more people should think that way because it's much easier to build something that is useful to like 10 people than it is easier. It's not easy, but it's easier than trying to build it for 1 million people, or 10 million people or whatever, try to take over the world. So I would love to see more of this going on. I would love, like, it is very much a not winner take all sort of thing, right? It ends up with a lot of people collaborating, and because you can do stuff that's like on such a small scale. Small, and it means that you don't have to worry about really competing with like me and you or me and Chad or whatever, because it's just slightly different, and there's so many, and they're next to each other and they can help each other, and it just really can turn into like kind of a rising tides lifts all boats situation, right? So
I mean, you're going to see Steely Dan tomorrow.
yeah.
Is there is there ever going to be a point where we say, you know what, we don't want to hear any more new music? We've heard all the
Yeah.
songs that have been created up to this point. Those are all the songs that we need. No,
Yeah.
we need new bands, and you need headliners, and you need openers, and you need joint tours, and you need all of those kinds of things, because the appetite for diverse new music, from indie pop to folk to you name it, there's an audience, and those communities get together at concerts and in record stores and you name it. And so that's the picture that I have in my mind of communities in supply chain. They're different radio stations.
Well, there's this kind of trope that I hear people say, which is, does the world really need another podcast or something like that? It's
Yes, of
like,
course it does.
of course, yes, duh. Yeah. Like, what do you, it's very cynical to say something like that.
Yeah.
And I probably, if I would have rewound 5 years ago, I probably would have been somebody saying that, because I was very cynical. And I've mentally kind of unwound my cynicism over the last, or I've made a very deliberate effort to. It's not always
Yeah.
easy, but like I noticed my tendencies, but I very deliberately tried to not be cynical about stuff like that, because it's just like so many sweet things would have not been made if they had just been like, man, do we really need another clothing company? Do we really need
Yeah.
another, piece of music or whatever? It doesn't matter what it is. So the message, like, and I say this to my friends all the time, like my quote unquote normal friends, like college friends, people who are like, well, Reed, what are you doing? Like, what do you do for work? I'm like, oh, I make memes sometimes and whatever. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I was like, dude, like, you realize you can just basically do whatever you want. Like, you can figure it out. That doesn't mean it's going to work or it's going to
Yeah.
be easy or you're not going to be, destitute as a result. Like, there's no guarantees, but if you can literally just do anything. Like, I firmly believe you can just do whatever you want and make it work.
I appreciate the cynical place that you were at. There was once those motivational posters that used to hang on company walls with all the hands in a circle, and they would, some inspiring quote. There's an opposite of that company called despair.com, and they make demotivational posters. And back in the day, one of them, it was making a point about blogs, and it just said, never before have so many had so little to say to so few. And that made me laugh. And somebody might say that about podcasting today. But
Totally.
there's somebody who sincerely and earnestly cares about quilting or knitting or something, and there's an audience of 9 people that are interested in that. But that is somebody's passion, and it's what their gift is, and they care sincerely about it. And I think that's beautiful. I think we should encourage more creators and not always have to be in a consuming mindset. But even if the audience is small and you've got something to say, I strongly encourage people to do that, because we need more and more of that. We live in a pretty insincere world right now.
Well, it's funny because the internet and technology in general can, and I think I recorded a bit. I've been recording these like daily videos, and I just post them. I don't ever plan them, know what I'm going to say. I just press record and just talk about something that's on my mind. I did one the other day that was basically like, why did I just blank? What were we just talking about?
Sincerity and a small idea, and just taking a shot with it. Maybe we have found the limit.
Dude, I just had like something really good to say, and my brain just gave up on me. We what the heck was I going to say?
You randomly post your thoughts, long form videos.
Yeah.
It'll come to you.
We need, oh, duh. The sharpest double-edged sword in the world is the modern kind of technology.
Ooh.
Like the internet, phones, like whatever, right? Possibilities are literally endless, and constraints like are very useful. Like, you need to constrain yourself, else you'll never do anything. And I used to be kind of a Luddite I used to be very much like, oh, like I need to spend as little time as possible on social media. I need to spend as little time as possible on my phone, right? Whatever. And yeah, looking back, if all you do is mindlessly scroll and consume and do nothing with it, yeah, you should probably do less of that. And yeah, I probably was right for thinking I should do this less. I should not be scrolling Instagram all the time. But like the reality is if you just kind of turn the tables and you're like, okay, like I literally am connected to every single other person who's connected to this network, which is like billions of people. Everybody I know is connected to this. Every potential customer for a business, every single potential person who shares an interest with me is here. Like, and I can reach them. It's not as simple as just like doing that. Like, obviously it takes work and it takes time, but like it's possible. And that's never literally existed ever.
Until now.
Until now. And it's so lame to me to be like, oh, we need to just get off social media. Social media is bad. It's like, yeah, are there bad things? Are people wrecking their brains mindlessly scrolling? Yeah, but like, let's emphasize more like creating stuff, putting your thoughts out there, sharing, like being open-minded about like finding people out there who share similar interests. And it's like there's so much to be gained from that, and there's so many friendships that you can and people you can meet and relationships you can have. It's like it's literally limitless. But that's the problem, because limitless, like I said, constraints are useful. So you have to constrain yourself. And if you're not constrained, like you will go crazy. So I've said a lot, but sharpest double-edged sword in the world.
Well, Reed, thanks for unpacking all of this. I don't know if I understand anymore. I don't think we've put you in a box, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're going to do next. It doesn't sound like you do either. And for whatever reason, that makes me really happy.
Yeah, no, it's fun, man. I'm having fun. I'm luckily figuring out how to pay my bills.
Yeah.
I've got a family. I've got a wife. I've got a daughter, and I'm about to have another kid in June. So
Congrats.
We're figuring it out. Yeah, thanks. So I'm one more day with a roof over my head. So that's good.
Well, I wish you nothing but continued success. Keep selling hats, keep building software, keep meeting people, and whatever emerges from all of that, keep putting that speed bump in front of yourself on curse words. That's my challenge for you for 24. and I just hope good things happen.
Likewise, bro. I appreciate this chance for self-reflection. It's always good to come on shows where people don't have any questions, because then you can kind of just say whatever comes to mind. So it's my favorite type of thing. So I appreciate it.
Well, best of luck. And of course, we're all rooting for you.
Thanks, Nate. I'm rooting for you too, bro.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Bootstrapper's Guide to Logistics. And a special thank you to our sponsors and the team behind the scenes who make it all possible. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the podcast to get the latest updates. To learn more about the show and connect with the growing community of entrepreneurs, visit logisticsfounders.com. And of course, thank you to all the founders who trust us to share their stories.